next speaker will be talking about how, as a country, we should overcome those obstacles. And it's a very great introduction. You have mentioned about the cancerous corruption that we find ourselves living in. We had state capture that ran for 3 good years, and still, even after 3 years, the honorable judge still felt I needed more time to deal with this thing. That just shows you the magnitude of that aspect of corruption that he was trying to unveil. You spoke about the service delivery. You are quite right. The lights might go off on us right where we are at this particular point, and those are the challenges that we have. The challenges of the dwindling confidence that the citizens have on the leadership, that the citizens have on what we provide as when I look at the academias, what we provide as solutions to our daily lives. I saw an article at one point where, these drawings that people usually do, and they drew a person wearing a graduate regalia and pulling a trolley of recycling metals. And they say, I have gone and I have studied and I have obtained this regalia, but only to come and pull the trolley that recycles the bin. So you have put the challenges right on the table. But I think it is so that the honorable judge, Judge Ngoepe, who's going to take us through how South Africa can overcome these obstacles, can then springboard from in assisting us. I can assure you, colleagues, that in this room we have all the rich minds that will assist us in unpacking these social ills, in unpacking and coming up with solutions to this, what may seem dire, but is not really dire, that we can overcome. But maybe before I call the honorable judge to come and address us on the topic on how SA overcomes this obstacle, I also want to say, on the backdrop of what the president has said, if I can give you a moment for you to think of a public service that is preoccupied about nothing but to serve the citizen. If you can just take a moment and think about it and see it, and say, now I see what a public service that needs to be preoccupied with serving the citizens looks like. It looks like a police officer who wears their uniform in the morning, gets on time at the point that they need to be, and leaves for those hours that he's there, observing to make sure that there is no law that is broken. It talks to a nurse that wears that regalia of theirs and is preoccupied with nothing but to make sure that they give and provide a health service to our people. It talks about our leaders that are preoccupied with nothing else. That self-enrichment that the president was talking about is not anywhere, it's not preoccupying their minds. All that they are preoccupied about is, how can I make a change in the life of Mama Zibuko with what I am doing and what I have been privileged to do. So, Judge President, I would like to invite you to the podium at this point to hear the wisdom that comes from you on how we can turn around this situation and how South Africa can overcome its obstacles. Please help me to welcome the judge on stage. Thanks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you can tell, as my voice can tell, I'm not in a very good shape. When I couldn't bear it any longer, the terrible flu that came down upon me. On Tuesday last week, when I couldn't take it anymore, I went to go and see a doctor. And Tuesday last week, the doctor ordered me to be in bed. And I've been in bed for more than a week until this morning. I never came out of my house until this morning when I had to come. And yesterday, I could barely whisper a word out. But miraculously today, at least you can hear me. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks, Mr. President, Mr. Rakwal. It's an honor to be here with you today. I'm not talking to you for the first time, but I'm sure, as you have said, the theme is different today, and so too the circumstances. The theme of your conference is, let us just remind ourselves, step up to the mark and put citizens first. Within the context of the above theme, the question I'm asked to address specifically is, how can South Africa overcome its obstacles? Both the theme and the question could not have come and could not have been raised at a more appropriate time for the reasons that we all know, some of which Mr. Rakwal has just mentioned. Given their importance, they require honest approach and answers, both of which may visit one with some unpopularity. But the situation in which the country presently finds itself is too grave to worry about that. Therefore, I congratulate you on choosing such an important theme and such a critical question, just at the right time. In order for us to be able to overcome our obstacles, we must, first and foremost, be frank enough to acknowledge our problems. There are many. They are varied and fundamental. Fundamental in the sense that they deeply compromise the enjoyment of our basic human rights. Think of this massive unemployment around us, poor health facilities, poor education, lack of roof over our heads, no running or regularly running water, and, as Mr. Rakwal has said, no reliable electricity supply. That is a failure to provide even the most basic of services. Let us, by the way, remind ourselves that this is not a country without resources. It is simply a question of how resources are used or, more appropriately, misused. A country without resources cannot produce as many billionaires as we have, let alone the plethora of millionaires that are surrounding us. A country without resources cannot be reported to have the biggest gulf between the rich and the poor in the world, because we would otherwise all be equally poor. Yet, that is not the case. In fact, the fear is that the divide is getting wider and wider, precisely because the resources are being plundered. It must be arrested. In attempting to address the burning questions you ask, we must go further to again be frank enough to accept that the root cause of all the ills that bedevil us is the lack of economic development. Directly or indirectly, they are linked. They are all linked to that. It follows, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that we must generate economic development. For government to be able to do that and to address the basic needs of the people, the needs of the people that I talked about, it does require money. The problem here is that The government is not an employee to receive some salaries at the end of the month, some income. On the contrary, it is an employer. To have money, it needs to collect tax, but which, as I argue later, must be used prudently for the benefit of the people. That is where I step in as the tax ombud, and that is why perhaps you invited me. A task I've been charged with for the past 9 years, with my term ending possibly this month, depending on the pleasure of the Minister of Finance. In that role as the tax ombud, I must make sure that the South African Revenue Service collects tax in a fair and lawful manner. I see my CEO here, Professor Lawaila, is here, and she can support my statement. I take taxpayers' complaints up with SARS and, where appropriate, make recommendations if I do find in favor of the taxpayer. I even investigate systemic issues which, by their nature, affect a number of taxpayers. But my role being impartial, I have also taken the attitude that taxpayers must give to Caesar what is due to him. The attitude that inasmuch as they should not be made to pay 1 cent more than they should not be made to pay one cent less than they should. They must pay it all. The duty to pay tax does, at the same time, give taxpayers the right to demand that taxes be used correctly and with some accountability, a point to which I return later. Indeed, with prudent and honest use of taxes, we may find ourselves borrowing less and less from international financial institutions, for example. We might find ourselves with a manageable or increasingly decreasing foreign debt. To the very pertinent question you ask, how can South Africa overcome its obstacles? I therefore answer it from the perspective of how we use people's tax. The same frankness with which we acknowledge our problems must lead us to accept that many problems largely resulted from the fact that we did not use the people's tax correctly. Excuse me. If any further evidence was needed to confirm that, the Zondo Commission's findings have settled all the doubt. In fact, it largely confirms what had all along been an open secret. We therefore know that through rampant corruption and theft, we wasted the wealth of our nation. Before I venture further as to how we can get things right, let me restate, for context, the magnitude of the waste revealed by the Zondo Commission. Billions, possibly trillions, have been stolen. What is more, ladies and gentlemen, is that a lot of that money has allegedly been taken out of the country, with the result that not a cent thereof will ever be invested here. I call that a total theft. The Office of the Tax Ombud, which has for years been ensuring that taxpayers are treated fairly so that they are tax compliant, is deeply hurt by all these revelations. Because by exhorting taxpayers to pay not 1 cent less, and by warning them against tax evasion and against aggressive tax avoidance schemes, one feels as though we led them like sheep to the slaughterhouse, where they would be devoured by wolves and vultures. Therefore, I say, As the Office of Tax Ombud, we have been deeply hurt and felt betrayed by these revelations. Ladies and gentlemen, 1994 came, and soon thereafter, we began to drop the ball and abandoned the bigger picture we had envisioned. It was also partly because of my role as the tax ombud, witnessing what was happening to the resources of the country, that I felt the urge to put down some thoughts, raising issues in my book, Rich Pickings Out of the Past. I saw it on the corridor. I cannot therefore entirely divorce myself from some parts of that book, which I wrote in agony, in answering your million-dollar question, namely, how can we overcome our obstacles? Well, we can, provided we reflect on our past, both before and post 1994. I must make it clear that while I recognize your role in guarding the nation's wealth, my points go beyond, far beyond, you or your profession. Therefore, to address the ills of the country, it would not be enough just to deal with yourselves only. Because was it not so that in any case, monies were stolen, not only despite the supposed vigilant watch of accountants, but in some instances, through their active assistance. Indeed, some were alleged to be thieves themselves. Large firms were implicated, so too a host of other professionals, such as engineers and lawyers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is therefore clear that professional ethics alone were and cannot be sufficient on their own. The cause of the rot must, in my view, therefore have been deeper and wider. Our traditional belief that men and women steeped in professional ethics are reliable safekeepers of our national wealth has been deeply shaken. We must therefore, in our quest for answers to your questions, look at all of our society, of which we are, professional or otherwise, an integral part after all. I cast no specific aspersions on you as professionals, either individually or collectively. But we are concerned, as I've just said, that professional rules and ethics have not been enough to protect us against greed and corruption. One cannot exhaust all the ills that led to the breakdown of society, of which you are part. But the same frankness requires of us to point out to a few and to suggest as to what could be done. The findings of the Zondo Commission allow for no delay because prosecuting people alone would not be sufficient. You can take that word from me. In my career as 18 years as a judge, I sentenced criminals to prison. Some of them did not repent. 1994, ladies and gentlemen, held great promises for us. We envisioned a prosperous country where our people would enjoy a better life. How come we dropped the ball? To start with, I think we abandoned our values as a people. These values taught us to distinguish between, simply put, right and wrong, to distinguish simply between good and bad. We abandoned them. And that's one of the laments in my book, that let's go back into history. What do we find? A wealth of abandoned values. The abandonment of these values, some of which guided and strengthened our resolve to defeat apartheid, happened both at the individual and collective levels. The abandonment of these values happened also at the local, provincial, and national levels. It has been a total abandonment of values. Our forebears saw it as their sacred duty to nurture in us all those values, which translated into simple things such as respect and concern for each other. They sought to inculcate in us the Ubuntu that we now so fashionably talk about, but without even beginning to practice. Properly practiced, these values which I argue we have abandoned would tell us, as your theme says, I repeat, they would tell us, as your theme says, to put people first. To be able to do so, though, to be able to put people first, you must see yourself as, first and foremost, simply a South African, a patriot. Before you are an accountant, before you are a lawyer, before you are a politician, or even importantly, before you are a member of a particular political party. Put the country first. In other words, please first see yourself as part of everybody else, as part of the entire citizenry and humanity around you. That, ladies and gentlemen, would put you in the same boat with everybody, in the same boat with them. It would therefore make you share the same sufferings and fate with them. In that way, you would not want to hurt them. In that way, you would not want to starve them through theft and maladministration. In that way, you would not want to deprive people with whom you share a common past of deprivation, want, and disease, because you will be betraying them. I've told people that even in the best of times, betraying anybody is a bad thing, but the betrayal is even worse and more pernicious when you are betrayed by a person with whom you share a common past of poverty and disease. It exacerbates the betrayal. We have been betrayed. Those who have no qualms about doing that have long abandoned the fundamental values I referred to above. The values that were generously bequeathed to us by our forebears, who very wisely chose not to take them with them to the grave, but to bequeath them to us. Those people who have abandoned those values are the shameless, are the greedy, are the thieves. Indeed, in some instances, we have not only violated the oaths we took, but also violated basic common moral rules and religious rules. Basic, common, decent rules. And as I say, even violated religious rules. Supposedly devout Christians supposedly devout Muslims, supposedly devout Hindus, and people of the Jewish faith have all of them been caught with their fingers in the till. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a big problem when we tell ourselves that our conduct falls only to be controlled by strict, cold criminal law. Or as I told other people the other day, our conduct falls only to be controlled by Mr. Bekicele's law, the police. No, that should not be the case. We must be good citizens long before we come into collision with the law. Our conduct must be controlled by all the other sets of rules that I've referred to above. Simple rules of morality, rules of profession, religious and societal expectations, which were enforced back then, even by a sheer fear of a taboo. They won't do it for fear of a taboo, not for fear of being arrested by Cele or going to prison or being sentenced to jail by Bernard Ngoepe. No, for fear of a taboo. They won't do it. Those are the rules that should, strictly speaking, just sufficiently control us and make us good human beings. Let me be philosophical about it. Why? You see, if you allow yourself to be controlled by those simple rules of morality, and Cele's law is here, you get control at this level, you heighten and widen the buffer zone so that you'll be too far away from crossing the criminal law and you are safe. But we have failed to allow ourselves to be controlled in that fashion. These sets of rules, I say, would shepherd and steer our conduct away from a possible breach of the law. But incredibly, we have now reached a point even where we neither respect nor fear even Cele's law, not even criminal law. The results are unprecedented lawlessness, greed, corruption, as you said, nepotism. The Zondo Commission has, as I have already said, settled all doubt that the ball has been dropped, that the great vision is in danger of total disintegration. Your question whether the country can overcome its obstacles is so pertinent that it cannot be avoided. But here too, the answer must be frank. We are not as yet, ladies and gentlemen, beyond redemption. But we must look back into the past and extract some valuable lessons. To many questions directed to me about the book, I explained why that title. The title is Rich Pickings Out of the Past. And I said, you have got to go into the past, you'll find a wealth of lessons which we ignored. And I said, rich pickings out of, not from the past, out of the past, because like when you extract diamond and gold, you dig into the bowels of the earth to extract diamond. If we were to go into that history that I'm talking about, you'll extract diamond and gold out of the past. It's rich. The past is rich. I refer, by the way, in my book to the past as the greatest teacher. It is because history never lies. The past is the great teacher because history never lies. You may try to distort history, but that does not and can never make it history a liar. The liar would be the distorter. The past is as fixed as a mountain or a beacon, and therefore constitute a reliable point of reference. That is the good thing about the past. What better point of reference do you use as a guide that a point of reference which does not change, does not move? As I told people, it does not change like the Cape Town weather. It's always there. That is the best point. History is the best point of reference. Why personally have a lot of respect for history. Locked in the past are those valuable lessons whose loss I've just lamented. Ladies and gentlemen, you ask me what we should do. You ask me what we should do, how to reverse your fortunes. Those values must be relearned. Again, dreadful as our history is, there is much, much, much to learn from it. Just one or 2 points to validate my argument briefly that ugly as our history is, there's a lot to be learned from it. Go there, ask the past. Why did so few whites, not even all the white people in the country, why did so few whites who were the champions of apartheid manage to put down so many millions of black people and other white people for so long a time? Why? MC, when I allocated my time, I budgeted for me to repeat this question, and also the answer that I'm going to give. I've made accommodation for my repeat of this question. Why did so few whites who were the champions of apartheid manage to put down so many millions of black people and other whites for so long a time? It was because of their honest and total commitment to make apartheid work, even though it was a misguided policy and just a pipe dream. If they could, for so long a time, impose an evil system that was condemned by the whole world, how come that we failed for any length of time after 1994 to make success of a democratic dispensation acclaimed and supported by so many millions of us and by the rest of the world? It is because, among others, we failed to learn from apartheid practitioners the importance of honest commitment towards the achievement of a collective purpose. Had we done so, we would have made this country a far better place for people. Instead of learning from the apartheid practitioners what wonderful things total and honest commitment can achieve towards achieving a common goal, we abandoned that. We failed to learn that. Instead, we compromised our principles. Ladies and gentlemen, we compromised our principles. We sold our souls to the lowest bidders, not even to the highest. And we gave our much needed resources, we gave it away for nothing, including to foreigners. Peeping into history, we will learn a lot more, I assure you. I addressed a number of professional people who had read my book and wanted me to talk to me about it. There are about 30 or 40 of them. Engineers, lawyers, and the like in their 30s. And we kept on talking about this history and the lessons I'm talking about the book. And they would ask me so many questions, and time and again I would say to them, go and read the book. And sometimes we'll go on, and one of them will ask, and somebody will stand up and say, go and read the book. Peeping into history, we will learn a lot more. Ladies and gentlemen, go and read the book. We will find that men and women of all races sacrificed a great deal, including their lives, for a better South Africa. That is what we will find if we are to visit our history. As one of the 3 judges appointed by the then President Mandela in 1996 to hear applications for amnesty for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I was told and listened to as to how people fighting for a new South Africa were tortured, maimed, and killed. At one time, I had to listen to a story where 3 young people from Melodi were taken out on the N121 Spinners River. They were executed. They executed 2, and the 3rd one said, before you kill me, please allow me to sing Nkosi Sikelel, Africa Before You Kill Me, which was prohibited at the time. They allowed him to sing it and executed him. Years later, their bones were exhumed from there. But these were many, many, many stories that I listened to. And I listened as to how many people were killed and their bodies were thrown into crocodile-infested rivers to get rid of evidence. I listened to all those. I argue, therefore, that perhaps if we were to revisit all those things, to revisit that painful past of ours, we might be reminded of the high price paid for a new South Africa. And then recommit ourselves to making it a reality. But it is not only people in leadership positions who lost the plot. Oh no. Ordinary people too have and continue to lose the plot. Not only ordinary people, but even the young and the old. My sword therefore cuts at both ends. We have, for example, seen people in one area in Limpopo, Vuani, burning down some 20-something schools simply because they did not want to fall under a particular municipality. They were prompted by nothing else but thinly disguised tribal bias. We have seen parents preventing their children from going to school simply because they wanted a tarred road to run through their village. The government had to intervene to rescue children from their own parents who were preventing them to go to school, to go and prepare for matric, to go and find a camping place elsewhere so that the children can be taught away from their parents who were preventing them from attending school because they wanted a tarred road. We have seen academic infrastructure damaged allegedly by students themselves. Many years ago, when I retired, when I was appointed a judge, I had a huge library. I donated it to one of the disadvantaged universities, almost my entire library. Years down the line, I read in the newspaper that students at that university tried to set the library alight because the administration refused to give them enough money to buy liquor for an annual occasion. My heart sank because the dean of the faculty drove all the way to my library with a truck to come and remove my library because I didn't need it. Judges were given full libraries. My heart sank. We hear about such things. We have seen infrastructure like civic halls and clinics destroyed in the name of delivery protests, only to find no clinic to visit the next day. It has just been alleged that children set their own school alight simply because the police confiscated from them what the law allowed the police to confiscate. All these people too, in fact, all of us need to revisit the past for reinvigoration if there is to be any hope of reigniting and redeeming our nation. We must revisit our values. A few years ago, I was addressing commerce students at the University of Cape Town. And I said to them, imagine an elderly couple, an elderly man whose total wealth is 5.5 head of cattle. The old lady has 4 chickens, one of which is laying some 12 eggs. They live in 2 rondables out in the rural areas. That constitutes their total wealth, except the SASA allowance. All the old man has is the same old jackets, in fact, maybe even an overcoat under the hot sun, which all the time he carries on his body to cover his otherwise naked shoulders. Imagine stealing from those people. Because indeed, ladies and gentlemen, if we steal, if we fail to guard the wealth of our nation, if we dissipate our resources, if we don't guard tax monies, instead we steal them, we steal from those people. The plot has been lost. We are not beyond redemption, provided. Thank you.